It was time, really. The reason all of us in the Beatles shied away from Beatles material directly after the breakup.
The reason we in the Beatles avoided Beatles material right after the breakup. When people think of Paul McCartney, they imagine the friendly Beatle with catchy bass lines and a youthful smile. The songwriter who wrote Yesterday, the cultural figure who changed popular music. But behind the knightly image and friendly personality is a man with strong views about his fellow musicians. Sir Paul has mostly kept a diplomatic image in public during his career, but people close to him have seen times when his polite exterior broke, showing strong criticism of bands that fell short of his high standards. Paul can be very straightforward when talking about music. In a rare interview from 2018, former Wings guitarist Denny Laine revealed, "He knows clearly what he likes and what he doesn't, and he's open about it when he's not in public." From heated arguments during the British invasion to negative remarks about punk rockers who questioned his musical legacy, McCartney's personal views on some artists show a competitive side that average fans rarely see. His musical conflicts weren't only about personal issues, they showed deep differences in artistic direction, songwriting beliefs, and what rock music should really stand for. Today we're listing the 6 bands that Paul McCartney disliked, and why even some of the biggest names in music faced the not-so-nice criticism from the cute Beatles. 6. The Rolling Stone. The rivalry between the Beatles and the Stones marked a generation, but fans didn't realize how personal it became behind the scenes. Even though he pretends to have a friendly rivalry, McCartney has often made indirect digs at the Stones during his career. "I've always thought the Rolling Stones were a blues cover band that got lucky," McCartney reportedly told producer George Martin during a late-night session at Abbey Road in 1968. Although the comment didn't get much attention at the time, Paul's feelings have been expressed more subtly over the years. In a 2021 interview with The New Yorker, McCartney couldn't resist. "No estoy seguro de si debo decirlo, pero son una banda de versiones de blues. That's kind of what the Stones are. I believe we reached a little farther than they did." Mick Jagger quickly responded by saying the Beatles are a 4-member band with 1 drummer, while he joked that the Stones are still drawing large crowds in stadiums. Paul's dislike appears to come from what he thought was the Stones' lack of originality. Former Apple Records executive Peter Brown shared that Paul always believed the Stones were copying them, releasing similar albums a few months after the Beatles had already done it. McCartney's reaction was even more revealing. When John Lennon thought about producing a Stones album in 1969, studio engineer Jeff Emmerich said that Paul was clearly annoyed, asking why John would spend his time on them when the Beatles had their own projects to focus on. Although McCartney has sometimes complimented certain Stones songs, the competitive tension between them has never completely gone away. When Rolling Stone magazine inquired about the rivalry in 2016, Paul's careful response still had a sharp tone. "They're a really good band, but they're just not the Beatles, right?" 5. The Sex Pistols. The musical movement that really affected Paul McCartney was punk rock, and no band represented that rebellion better than the Sex Pistols. When the anarchic group formed in 1976 with their loud aggressive music and anti-establishment message, McCartney was said to be very angry about their intentional rejection of everything he had contributed to. In a rare interview in 2003, John Eastman, Linda McCartney's brother, said that Paul thought their music was a painful experience for his ears. He couldn't see why anyone would celebrate not being able to play their instruments well. The feeling was shared. When the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen went up the charts, McCartney's Mull of Kintyre was also doing very well that same week. Johnny Rotten, also known as John Lydon, openly called Paul a dinosaur, symbolizing everything that punk opposed. What really angered McCartney was not just their musical style, but their direct attacks on his legacy. Wings drummer Denny Seiwell said that Paul was especially hurt when he found out that the Pistols were using Beatles posters as targets during their rehearsals. He tried to laugh it off, but it clearly upset him a lot, Seiwell remembered. The tension reached its highest point when both groups were recording in nearby studios at London's Air facility in early 1977. Studio manager Dave Harris recalled that Paul made a friendly move to introduce himself, and Sid Vicious seemed to mumble something about sellouts in the establishment. McCartney quickly turned around and never spoke to them again. Years later, McCartney would reluctantly acknowledge that the punk movement had freshened up the music scene, but he never really liked the Sex Pistols. In a 2016 BBC interview, when asked about the band, Paul said, "Not my cup of tea really," with a tone that showed a lot about how he really felt. 4. Oasis. In the 1990s, the Britpop movement brought Oasis to fame, with Noel Gallagher openly admiring McCartney's songwriting and calling themselves followers of the Beatles. You might think this praise would make Paul feel good, but in private, it actually had the opposite effect. Paul thought their obsession with the Beatles was annoying, and almost disrespectful, according to McCartney's longtime publicist Jeff Baker. He felt they were turning his life's work into just a few copied chords and reused melodies. What really bothered McCartney was Oasis's bold attitude mixed with what he saw as copied music. In a private dinner in 1997, Paul reportedly said to George Martin, "Just get the swagger right, but where's the innovation? We never just copied our heroes. Los transformamos." The tension increased because of the Gallagher brothers' famous way of speaking their minds. And Noel said in a 1996 interview that Oasis was bigger than the Beatles. McCartney was really angry. According to Beatles biographer Philip Norman, Paul found such comparisons silly, and secretly called the band arrogant newcomers with little talent and a big ego. An uncomfortable moment happened at the 2000 Q Awards when both McCartney and Oasis were being honored. Backstage, Liam Gallagher seems to have asked Paul for an autograph, but he was met with an unexpectedly cold response. One witness said that McCartney was friendly but obviously uneasy during the conversation. Over the years, Paul has become a bit less strict in his views, sometimes recognizing Oasis's role in keeping guitar music popular. However, those close to him say he never completely got over what he viewed as their bold stealing of the Beatles' music style. In a 2018 GQ interview, when asked about Oasis, McCartney gave a short answer: "Good songs. I wish they had discovered their own way of expressing themselves. It seems like you've only provided a number. Could you please provide the text you want to be simplified?" The Monkees. Few bands have received Paul McCartney's quiet disdain more than the Monkees. While many saw them as innocent fun, Paul reportedly saw them as a selfish commercial use of what the Beatles had created. Paul thought they were a fake version, according to Beatles assistant Alastair Taylor in his memoir. He would switch radio stations whenever their songs played while driving to the studio. The Monkees' fake origins really upset McCartney, who had worked hard in Hamburg's clubs for years before becoming famous. In a heated argument with Brian Epstein in 1967, Paul allegedly remarked, "They're making a mockery of what we built. 4 actors acting like a band. That's disrespectful." The tension grew when the Monkees' TV show started adding psychedelic elements after the release of Sgt. Pepper. George Harrison said that McCartney saw this as clear theft. Paul would get really worked up about it. He'd say, "They are using our plan without putting in any effort." An uncomfortable moment happened at a party in Los Angeles in 1968 when McCartney allegedly ignored Mickey Dolenz and walked away during their conversation. Dolenz later remembered, "I don't think he ever accepted us as legitimate musicians." Even though the Monkees later sought creative control and became a real band, McCartney's view never completely changed. In a 2011 interview, when asked about them, his diplomatic answer still had a clear sharpness. "They had some catchy songs, but they were definitely not the Beatles." Right. Chaka 2. The Bee Gees' rise. The disco boom of the late 1970s brought the Bee Gees great success, while McCartney's career after Wings started to slow down. This situation led to what those close to the matter call a growing resentment from Paul towards the Gibb brothers. Producer Chris Thomas remembered that Paul felt caught off guard by disco. These 3 brothers were suddenly selling more records than the Beatles did with Saturday Night Fever, and he felt hurt by it. McCartney's frustration reportedly came from his view that the Bee Gees changed from sounding like the Beatles to becoming disco superstars. Wings guitarist Lawrence Juber said that Paul would listen to their high harmonies and complain that they had changed their original sound for money. The rivalry grew stronger when both groups were recording at the same studio in Miami in 1979. Studio manager Tony Bongiofe recalled that Paul would plan his sessions to miss them. When someone said the Bee Gees had set another chart record, he clearly became uneasy. What really bothered McCartney was the praise they got from critics. When the Bee Gees were praised as great songwriters after their disco makeover, Paul supposedly told his bandmates that they were using the same 3 chords as everyone else. They have simply made them faster and included a drum machine. Although Paul has never openly criticized the Bee Gees, his clear choice not to mention them when talking about important artists says a lot. Even during a 2001 tribute after Maurice Gibbs' death, McCartney's message was quite short and distant compared to the warm condolences from other artists, indicating that the rivalry still hurt. Uno, the Beach Boys. The biggest music rivalry in Paul McCartney's career wasn't with punk bands or stadium rock artists. It was with the Beach Boys, the early leaders of America's sunshine pop. What started as respect between McCartney and Brian Wilson turned into a hard creative rivalry that people in the music industry still talk about years later. Phil Spector compared Paul and Brian to 2 great chess masters. Cada movimiento que uno hacía, el otro tenía que superarlo. It began as a friendly relationship but then became an obsession for both of them. The rivalry started after McCartney listened to Pet Sounds in 1966. Beatles producer George Martin said that Paul felt both inspired and threatened. He played it all the time, examining each note. Then he'd say, "We need to go further than this," which directly led to Sgt. Pepper. What really damaged the relationship was the unfinished Smile album. When Wilson put his great work aside because of mental health issues, McCartney reportedly did not take it seriously. Mel Evans, a roadie for the Beatles, remembered Paul saying, "If you can't finish what you start, you shouldn't be in this business. We keep going no matter what." The tension was at its highest during a terrible dinner party in 1967 at Brian Wilson's house. McCartney is said to have criticized some Beach Boys songs for being simple and claimed their harmonies were easy to anticipate. Dennis Wilson, the drummer for the Beach Boys, said that Paul believed he had provided useful feedback when he left. Brian stayed silent for days after that. Over the years the rivalry became more distant. In a 1993 interview, when asked about the influence of the Beach Boys, McCartney clearly downplayed their effect. "They made beautiful harmonies, but I believe people exaggerate their impact on us. Ya estábamos avanzando bastante." Even in recent years when talking about God Only Knows and a song he calls perfect, McCartney still adds phrases like "for American pop music" or "of that period." This shows he still has a competitive spirit that time hasn't lessened. According to Beach Boys historian David Leaf, Paul appreciates Brian's work, but he will never completely accept how much it influenced him. That would mean accepting that someone else influenced the Beatles' growth. Here's our list of the 6 bands that annoyed Paul McCartney. From creative competition to personal conflicts, even music legends have their musical enemies. What do you think about these conflicts? Were you surprised by any of them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this music exploration, hit that like button, and subscribe for more hidden stories from rock history. Press the notification bell so you won't miss our uploads every week.